June 12, 1945, New York Harbor. The gray transport ship groaned against the pier, its hull scraping wood as tugboats guided it into position. Below deck, 147 German women sat in darkness, listening to the metallic clang of the gangplank lowering. They had not slept in 11 days. They whispered the same questions over and over. Will they beat us? Will they starve us? Will they make us disappear? These were nurses, not soldiers. Young women who had spent years stitching wounds on the Eastern Front, watching boys bleed out in field hospitals while bombs shook the canvas walls. Now they were prisoners of the most powerful nation on earth, sailing straight into the heart of enemy territory. Before we continue, if you're finding this story as powerful as we did researching it, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and share this with someone who needs to hear a story about humanity in the darkest of times. These true accounts deserve to be remembered. Hannah Kleiner, 23 years old, from Berlin, pressed her notebook against her chest. Inside she had written 312 names. Every soldier she watched die. She wondered if her own name would soon be added to someone else's list. The loudspeaker crackled. "We have arrived." The women climbed to the deck. Through the morning haze they saw the skyline of New York City rising from the water like a fortress. Armed guards lined the dock below. This was it. The punishment would begin now. But then something happened that shattered everything they had been told about Americans. A woman in U.S. military uniform stepped forward and spoke to them in German. What she said next would not only spare their lives, it would force them to question everything they had believed about enemies, about war, about what it truly means to be human. The war in Europe had ended exactly 1 month earlier. May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. But for these 147 women, the nightmare was just beginning. They were members of the German Army Nursing Corps, most in their early 20s, who had served on both the Eastern and Western fronts. They had worked in field hospitals where temperatures dropped to minus 30 degrees, where frostbite killed as many men as bullets. Liesel Hartmann, 24, from Vienna, had once performed an emergency amputation by candlelight when the generator failed during a Russian bombardment. The soldier survived. She never forgot his screaming. Anna Weber, 26, from Dresden, had been on duty the night Allied bombs turned her city into an inferno. Over 25,000 people died in 2 nights. She had treated burn victims until her own hands blistered from touching charred skin. In late May 1945, American military police separated these nurses from other prisoners at a processing camp in Bavaria. A U.S. Army officer told them they would be transported to America. He did not say why. He did not say for how long. Most of them had no belongings left. Germany was rubble. Their hospitals had been bombed. Their homes destroyed. Some had not heard from their families in months. On June 1st, they were loaded onto trucks and driven to a port in France. The air smelled of diesel fuel and ocean salt. They climbed a metal gangplank onto a gray Navy transport ship. Below deck, they were assigned bunks in a large compartment. Clean, but crowded. Each woman received a thin mattress, a wool blanket, and a small pillow. The food shocked them. Bread, canned vegetables, powdered eggs. It was more than many had eaten in months. In the final weeks of the war, German rations had dropped to 800 calories per day. Some nurses had survived on less, stealing scraps from field kitchen garbage, boiling leather belts to make broth. The voyage across the Atlantic took 11 days. The ship rocked and pitched in the waves. Many became seasick. The smell of vomit mixed with salt air below deck. Sleep was impossible. Fear made it worse. At night, the women whispered in the darkness, "What will the Americans do to us? Will we be put in labor camps? Will we be punished for what Germany did?" They had all heard the propaganda. For years, German radio and newspapers had told them that Americans were cruel, that American soldiers showed no mercy, that prisoners in American hands were beaten, starved, humiliated. The Nazi regime had painted the enemy as monsters. Now these women were sailing straight toward them. Hannah later wrote in her diary, "We did not know what waited for us. We only knew what we had been told, and what we had been told was terrifying. I prayed every night, not for freedom, just for survival." Lissel remembered the silence. No one talked during the day. We sat on our bunks and stared at the walls. But at night I could hear women crying. Some prayed, some cursed. We were nurses. We had saved lives. But we did not know if our own lives were worth anything now. On the morning of June 12th, a voice came over the ship's speaker. Land sighted. The women rushed to the deck. Through the morning haze, they saw the outline of a city rising from the water. Tall buildings. Cranes. A harbor filled with ships. New York City. The richest city in the world. The heart of the enemy. The ship slowed. Tugboats guided it toward the pier. The harbor smelled of fish and smoke and summer air. On the dock below, the women could see vehicles waiting. Military trucks, buses, and something else. Red Cross ambulances lined up in a neat row. No chains, no armed guards pointing rifles. Just ambulances and buses. The women exchanged confused glances. This was not what they expected. The gangplank lowered with a heavy metallic clang. The sound echoed across the water like a gunshot. 147 German nurses stood frozen on the deck, staring down at American soil. Armed soldiers lined both sides of the walkway, their uniforms crisp, their boots polished, their faces showing no emotion. The German women began walking down single file, their footsteps unsteady on the metal ramp. The June sun was warm on their skin. The air smelled of salt, gasoline, and something cooking nearby that made their empty stomachs ache. At the bottom of the gangplank, a woman in American military uniform stepped forward. She was tall with graying hair pinned beneath her cap, her posture straight, her expression firm but not cruel. This was Colonel Margaret Harper, a senior officer in the U.S. Army Nurse Corps. She had been assigned to oversee the German prisoners. Colonel Harper raised her hand. The German nurses stopped walking. Silence fell over the dock. Then she spoke in German. "You are prisoners of war, but you are also nurses. You will be sent to military hospitals across the United States. There you will assist in the care of wounded American soldiers. You will be treated with the respect due to medical personnel under the Geneva Convention." The women stared at her. Some did not believe what they heard. Respect from the enemy. This had to be a trick, a lie to make them cooperate before the real punishment began. But there was no punishment. Instead, the women were guided toward waiting vehicles. Not prison trucks, not armored transports. Red Cross ambulances and civilian buses with cushioned seats. The doors opened. American personnel helped them climb aboard. No one shouted. No one shoved. No one pointed a weapon. The buses drove north into New Jersey. Through the windows, the German nurses watched the American landscape roll past. Green trees, paved roads, neat houses with gardens and parked automobiles. Everything looked untouched by war. No bombed buildings, no rubble, no refugees walking with bundles on their backs. Hannah pressed her forehead against the cool glass. She thought of Berlin, where entire neighborhoods had been reduced to dust. She thought of Dresden, where Anna had watched 25,000 people burn. And here was America, whole and clean and impossibly peaceful. The contrast was almost unbearable. The buses stopped at a military processing center. The building was large and white, surrounded by trimmed lawns. Inside, the German nurses were divided into groups and led to examination rooms. American nurses, women in pressed uniforms, conducted thorough medical checks. They took temperatures. They checked blood pressure. They examined eyes, ears, teeth, and skin. The process was professional, clinical. There was no roughness, no humiliation. After the examinations, the women were taken to a supply room. There, neatly folded on tables, were new uniforms, American nurse uniforms, white dresses with matching caps, stockings, leather shoes in multiple sizes. Each German nurse was measured and given clothing that fit. Lissel held up her new dress. The fabric was soft, the stitching perfect. She had not worn anything this clean in over a year. On the Eastern Front, she had patched her uniform with scraps from dead soldiers' coats. Now she was holding clothing that looked like it came from a department store. Next came the showers. Hot water, real soap, towels that were thick and white. Anna stood under the stream and let the heat soak into her muscles. She could not remember the last time she had bathed with warm water. In the final months of the war, German hospitals had no fuel for heating. Nurses washed with cold water from buckets. Sometimes they did not wash at all. After the showers, the women were led to a dining hall, long tables set with plates, forks, and napkins. American kitchen staff brought out trays of food. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes with butter, fresh green vegetables, bread rolls still warm from the oven, and for dessert, apple pie with coffee and real cream. Hannah sat down. She looked at the plate in front of her. Her hands trembled. In Germany, civilians were surviving on 1,000 calories per day. Soldiers at the front had received even less. She had once gone 3 days eating nothing but stale bread and turnip soup. She picked up her fork and took a bite of the pie. The sweetness spread across her tongue. The crust was flaky, the apples soft and warm. And then the tears came. She did not sob. She did not make a sound. The tears simply rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto the table. She was not crying from sadness. She was crying because someone had fed her like a human being. Around the room, other women were crying too, quietly, over their plates of chicken and potatoes, over their cups of real coffee. They cried because this was not punishment. This was kindness. And kindness, after years of war, felt almost unbearable. That night, the nurses slept in clean barracks with real beds, sheets, pillows, blankets that did not smell of blood or smoke. Hannah whispered to her bunkmate in the darkness, "They gave us uniforms, like we are still nurses." Her friend replied softly, "They gave us dignity." The next morning, the women learned their assignments. They would be split into groups and sent by train to hospitals across the country: Kansas, California, Illinois, New York. Their job would be to care for wounded American soldiers, the same men who had fought against Germany. This was not a gift, it was a test. And what happened in those hospitals would prove whether enemies could become something more. The trains left New Jersey on June 15th. 7 different trains heading in 7 different directions. Each carried a group of German nurses toward American military hospitals that desperately needed help. The war had ended in Europe, but the wounded kept arriving. Every day, transport ships docked at American ports carrying broken soldiers from the battlefields of France, Belgium, and Germany. Young men with missing arms, shattered legs, faces burned beyond recognition, minds destroyed by what they had seen. By June 1945, over 670,000 American soldiers had been wounded in the European theater alone. Another 250,000 had been wounded fighting in the Pacific. The hospitals needed 12,000 additional nurses just to meet basic care standards. They had fewer than 8,000, so the German prisoners became workers. Hannah's train headed west toward Kansas. She sat by the window and watched America pass by. Endless farmland. Golden wheat fields stretching to the horizon. Small towns with white churches and main streets lined with shops. Children playing in yards. Women hanging laundry on clotheslines. Everything was untouched, whole, alive. Hannah thought about the train rides she had taken across Germany in 1944. Bombed-out stations. Destroyed bridges. Refugees crowded into cattle cars with everything they owned tied in bedsheets. She had seen a child freeze to death on a platform in Munich because the train was delayed 12 hours in the snow. Here the American train had cushioned seats, a dining car serving sandwiches and coffee, clean bathrooms. The contrast was almost too painful to understand. On June 18th, the trains began arriving at their destinations. The German nurses stepped off onto platforms where military personnel waited with trucks and instructions. The women were tired, nervous. They still wore their American nurse uniforms. They still did not fully believe they would be treated as medical staff. At a military hospital outside Topeka, Kansas, Hannah and 14 other German nurses were led through the front entrance. The building was massive, 3 stories tall, over 400 beds. The hallways smelled of disinfectant and bandages. Somewhere deeper inside, someone was screaming. The head nurse, Captain Dorothy Wells, met them in the lobby. She was a stern woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. She looked the German women up and down. You will work 6-day weeks, 8-hour shifts. You will follow orders from American medical staff. You will treat every patient with professionalism. You are prisoners, but you are also nurses. Act like it. Then she handed each woman a name badge and a ward assignment. Hannah was assigned to Ward C amputees. Her hands shook as she pinned the badge to her uniform. She followed an American nurse down a long corridor. The floor was polished tile, the walls painted pale green. Through open doors she could see rows of hospital beds, men lying motionless, men with stumps where legs used to be, men with bandages covering half their faces. The American nurse stopped at a doorway. This is your ward. 42 patients. Most lost limbs at the Battle of the Bulge or during the Rhine crossing. Some have infections. Some have phantom pain. All of them have been through hell. She paused and looked directly at Hannah. They know you're German. Some will refuse your care. Some will say ugly things. Do your job anyway? Hannah stood alone in the doorway. Inside the ward, dozens of eyes turned toward her. American eyes. Soldiers who had fought against her country. Men who had watched their friends die at the hands of German bullets and bombs. One man, a sergeant with both legs amputated below the knee, stared at her uniform, then at her face. Then he spat on the floor. They're making us get cared for by Nazis now. What's next? Hitler himself comes to fluff my pillow? The room was tense with silence. Hannah approached the first bed, where a young American private lay with his right arm gone at the shoulder. She read the chart. Infection, dressing changes twice daily, morphine for pain. Speaking careful English, she began. He flinched, but stayed still. She cleaned the wound, applied antiseptic, and wrapped fresh gauze with steady hands. When she finished, he nodded, not trust, not hatred, but a beginning. The first week was brutal. Hannah worked 8-hour shifts quietly, changing bandages, adjusting morphine, cleaning wounds heavy with infection. Some men ignored her. Others muttered insults. One refused her care completely. She endured everything without complaint or defense. On the 5th day, the young private developed a high fever. His wound worsened. Hannah stayed close, checking temperature, cleaning repeatedly, pressing cold claws to his brow. By evening, the fever broke. When he woke and saw her there, he whispered that she stayed. She answered simply that he needed care. He thanked her, the first American soldier to do so. In California, Hannah worked in a naval burn ward filled with Marines from the Pacific. The smells were overwhelming, yet familiar, from Dresden. On her 3rd day, she assisted surgery. The exhausted surgeon hesitated, then trusted her. Anna moved flawlessly, anticipating instruments before requests. When it ended, he praised her steady hands. She said she had seen hell before, just like these men. In Illinois, Lissel treated amputees learning to walk again. Sergeant William Crawford often cursed and blamed her people. She answered only by lifting him after each fall. Months later, after walking across the room, he admitted he believed Germans were monsters. Lissel replied that war makes liars of everyone. By late 1945, quiet miracles appeared. In Kansas, Hannah found hot coffee with a note thanking the nurse who never slept. In Illinois, Lissel's patients pooled cigarette rations to buy her a chocolate bar for Christmas. She broke it and shared it. In California, a blinded Marine named Thomas Garrett gave Anna his Purple Heart. He asked her to carry it because she understood the cost. She kept it for 56 years, returning it to his family with a letter about courage, survival, and compassion. In 1947, the nurses chose their futures. Some returned home. Others stayed. Their story proves compassion outlasts conquest. They arrived as enemies and left as healers. History rarely records such moments, yet they endure quietly, reshaping lives beyond headlines. Medals or borders reminding future generations that mercy survives violence, and healing remains the bravest act after war ends, when humanity chooses empathy over fear and revenge alone now.